The question is not, should you be scared of Bitcoin? The question is, do you actually understand the money you are already using and trusting every single day? Now, that question struck me in this conversation with Eric Runge, because most of us are walking around using dollars, saving dollars, planning our future in dollars, retiring in dollars, building businesses in dollars, and we have not really stopped long enough to ask, what is this thing actually standing on? We just know what it feels like when groceries cost more. We know what it feels like when money does not stretch the way that it used to. We know what it feels like to work so hard and still wonder if the ground is moving underneath us. And this conversation, man, let me tell you, we went there. And not in a panic way, not in a doom and gloom way, not in one of those ways when you're on the internet, you go down one of those rabbit holes where everybody's yelling at you, buy something before midnight, right? This was different, which I respected and appreciated. Eric slowed it down. He took us into the dollar, the debt, inflation, fiat currency, gold, Bitcoin, and the deeper question underneath all of it. What is money? And I'll be real with you. I came into this conversation as somebody who understands money enough to respect it, but I am not going to sit here and act like I fully understood Bitcoin, because I didn't. I had questions, real questions, the kind a lot of people have, but just don't ask because they don't want to feel or sound like they're behind. I'm okay with that. But what is Bitcoin? We hear about it, but do we really know about it? What is Bitcoin? Why do people trust it? What makes it different from every other coin out there? Should regular people like you and I be looking at it? Should wealthy people be looking at it? Those are great questions. And maybe the bigger question, how do you prepare yourself for a financial world that may not look like the one that you and I grew up in? So Eric did not give easy answers. That is what I appreciated as well. He kept coming back to study, wisdom, responsibility, and long-term thinking. He talked about Bitcoin not as a quick win, but as something that forces maturity. And if you do not understand what you're holding, you may not have the emotional strength to hold it when the pressure comes. See, that part matters, because this is not just a conversation about Bitcoin. This is a conversation about trust. It is about preparation. And it's about whether we are making financial decisions from fear, from hype, habit, or real understanding. And if you are building a life, rebuilding your future, leading a family, or growing your own business, or just looking around at the economy wondering what is really happening, this conversation is going to make you think. Not because it gives you every answer, but because it gives you better questions. And that is where the value is. Let's check it out.
When you talk about resilience, I think America built itself to be resilient because it created so much freedom for people to pursue the American dream. And I'm talking at the founding and the outset. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough spot because once the currency is able to be printed at will without anything backing it, that historically, I think that signals the beginning of the end.
So for the person who is looking to start to put their money in the Bitcoin space, what would be your advice to them?
My advice is study Bitcoin. It's definitely something like you could buy it easily through Coinbase or Binance, but buying it doesn't mean you know what you're holding on to.
Right. So welcome to another episode of ThriveWell Journey. Today we have Eric Runge. And Eric, we just met today and we had some little difficulties, everything, but you're here. And I'm excited to have you here because the world of money, finances, and Bitcoin we'll be talking about. And we'll be talking about why this episode is important. But before we get into it, I just want the audience to get to know you, the community to get to know you and what you're all about. And I know that you are founder and CEO of Veritas Bitcoin Strategies. And you started your journey with, what does it say? Austrian economics and monetary theory. What is that? Can you talk about that and just kind of introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. And it's a pleasure to be here. Austrian economics was something that I studied. It's for a long time in the 2010s, and at the time didn't know how it was even relevant to my business. But I didn't think that it was. But really, it's a school of thought characterized by people like Murray Rothbard, and so I was reading Rothbard and other authors like Thomas Sowell, Gary North, and it takes a it's the opposite approach to the Keynesian economics that our current system currently operates on and functions under. The current government prints money, basically. An easy way to think of it is they print money to solve problems, and that creates more problems that they just sort of kick the can down the road. So Austrian economics says, let's be more responsible with our money. Let's not get ourselves into massive debt to solve the problems that were created by getting ourselves into massive debt. Now, that's kind of a short and sweet way to put it.
So, and that works, right? The Austrian theory, that whole economic understanding.
I think it would work better if the U.S. government would adopt that. And it definitely works when individuals adopt it. Yeah. It depends on what you mean by works, but it doesn't drive you into trillions of debt, trillions of dollars of debt.
Which is where we are right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Trillions and climbing.
Trillions and climbing. And I just kind of wanted to start. Well, let me first say why this episode is important. And I just want to go through a little bit of research that we have. And then I want to talk about, for a lot of people that don't understand like the dollar and the whole world of, debt and the debt that we're in and climbing. So the reason why this episode is important right now, and this is on my research, the economic and cultural climate of early 2026 is marked by resilience coupled with lingering uncertainty, which I would completely agree with. According to economic briefings, the U.S. economy has shown strength in the face of policy uncertainty and AI-driven disruption, yet questions remains around interest rate decisions, the national debt, which we were talking about, tariffs, potential stock market bubble, and a low-fire labor market. And what would you say about that? Like, when you hear that, what kind of shows up for you?
That's a great description of where we're at in sort of the short term. When you talk about resilience, I think America built itself to be resilient because it created so much freedom for people to pursue the American dream. And I'm talking at the founding and the outset. So consequently, we became the greatest economy in the world. The inventors lived here and invented things like, I don't know. I don't know where the airplane was invented. So I might get ahead of myself if I say that it was invented here. But my point is that the level of economic freedom that America created with our unique structure has allowed for a good bit of resilience. And so I think even though the dollar has lost so much value starting in 1913 to today, we've still remained resilient, and progress has outpaced the destruction of progress, i.e. government intervention and inflation. So the way I try to think of it is, we're absolutely resilient. And your report is talking about sort of in the short term. I'm thinking in the long term, how are we going to survive a debasing currency? Because all countries eventually debase their currency into zero, down to zero. But there are progressive elements of the economy still really alive, like AI. And the economy is still growing at a clip that's faster than the government is currently inflating the currency. And so it all kind of plays in together. But we're not dead yet. But I see our current system as definitely less productive and helpful to advance and progress civilization than if we didn't have this structure, if we had a more sound economic structure.
Hey, TTJ fam, just a quick interruption before we keep going. If the ThriveWell journey has supported you, challenged you, or helped you see your life from a different and more powerful place, take a second to support the work. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share this episode with somebody who may need it. And if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, leave a rating and review. We would really appreciate it. See, that simple action helps this message reach more people who are rebuilding their life, their purpose, and their direction. We're not just growing a podcast here. We're creating a space for real transformation and growth. So stay connected and keep walking with us on the ThriveWell journey. Now back to the podcast. Yeah, I agree. So to the early point, I think the plane was invented here. I would say it was the Wright brothers in Ohio. I think don't quote me on that either. But I think that would be accurate. I think if my history serves me correctly. But one of the things that you talked about was, the dollar kind of losing its value. What I do know of, and I'm going to come to you as a person who is understanding the world of finances, but don't know the world of finances, right? And so this kind of where this conversation will be directed towards those people and those in that mindset and that understanding. So the dollar was backed by gold, but then at a certain point, I don't know if it was Nixon or someone who took the dollar off of being backed by the gold, and then it was just kind of like the dollar. So can you explain that, and how is it that our dollar is still functional without the backing of gold?
Yeah, really good question. And thanks for the reminder on the Wright brothers, because you're supposed to know who invented the airplane and where it was invented. It slipped my mind, but thank you for that.
It's all good.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The minute you say something was invented here, like the hamburger, somebody will say, well, actually it wasn't. And so that's the trap I was trying to avoid.
Yeah.
But yeah, to the dollar. So yeah, the sort of starting at the beginning, the US dollar was backed by gold for the longest time, meaning that if you had a dollar bill in your hand, you could go and redeem it for the equivalent amount of gold. And so they had a certain amount of reserves in reserve, as it were, to keep the government. And that the effect is that kept the government from being able to print massive amounts of money at large. And it kept the rein on government behavior in terms of getting themselves into too much debt. Sort of, because by 1971, the US was about 6 times more in debt than we had the gold reserves to back it up. A huge part of that was the Vietnam War. Wars are very expensive.
Yeah.
And that seemed to have pushed us over the edge. So Nixon goes on TV and temporarily suspends the US dollar from gold. He basically eliminated the gold standard. But there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. And so here we are 50 plus years later, still temporarily suspended from the gold standard. So basically what that meant was the dollar, Nixon introduced the world to fiat currency. And so fiat basically just means by decree, because I say so. And so now the US dollar has value because the government says that it has value. Now, there's a case to be made for the petrodollar, that the dollar became backed ipso facto by oil instead of gold. Yeah, but not really officially. But so there's that. But in principle, because it doesn't have a hard commodity that you can redeem, like you can't take your dollar down to the bank and redeem it for a tiny barrel of oil.
Right.
So we're not, so practically speaking, we're in a fiat world, not a petrodollar world. And so because fiat just simply means because I say so, the thing that's holding the US dollar up is everybody's collective trust that the government can back the dollar. Back it with what is the question? With more dollars, with more taxing power? That's a question and that's a concern. So that's what happened when Nixon took us off the dollar. And then we could talk about what happened like to the culture and to society, because it had massive ripple effects and its tentacles reached to everywhere in society.
Yeah. So when I hear that, then the next question comes to my mind: how is the dollar then? And I get the whole fiat system, but then what is it? Because I mean, I remember here's my understanding. When I went to, this was back in 2000, 1999, 2000, something like that. Um, when I went to Europe, I lived over there for 6 months. I was going to school over in Spain, and I remember traveling around. And I mean, the dollar was it was strong. I think at the time it was euros. You get a whole bunch of euros for the dollar. The exchange the dollar was
Exchange rate was strong.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And right now, it's not that way. So give us the understanding of like the shift from maybe that era to now. And just talk about that era, like that shift from there to now, and then we'll go to the next part.
Are you talking about the era of like when the dollar was stronger than like the euro or the pound?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't have a ton of study on like exchange rates over history, over time, between the euro and the pound, sorry, other forms of currency versus the dollar. I know that because the US sits at the top of the world order right now, and the Bretton Woods Agreement happened post World War II, that basically allowed us to be at the top of the heap.
Right.
Ray Dalio calls it the world order, and he talks about a new world order. That's a term. The new world order is a term that has to be unpacked and explained because it sounds sort of crazy and fanatical.
Yeah.
But what Dalio simply means is who is king of the hill, who calls the shots, who runs the show. And other countries at times in the past have been at the top of the new world order. Like Rome was at the top of the world order back in ancient times, and then it got knocked down because the empire sort of declined and then ended up collapsing. Dalio says that we are now tipping down into the decline of we're going to lose our top of the heap status at some point, maybe 5 years, maybe 100 years from now. But being at the top of the heap allows us to have the stronger currency, sort of call the shots, as it were. So that's about what I can say as far as the strength of relative currencies. But what I can say is when Trump or whoever the next president is, it's not a red blue issue. It's whoever the president is gets on TV and talks about the strength of the US dollar. They are always talking about the strength relative to other currencies, but they never mention that they are talking about it relative to other currencies, because if they spoke about it in terms of strength relative to itself, they would always have to be saying that it's weak and getting weaker and weaker than it's ever been. Mm-hmm. That's not good for business if you're the government in the business of preserving trust and unity and not causing mass panic and breakdown. So you'll never hear the government talk about the dollar relative to itself, but you will hear it talk about the dollar relative to other currencies.
Other currencies, yeah. So then what drives the dollar to be, okay, so you talk about the being top of the heap, which is where we are. I know you said Rome was at the point, and Rome is where currency was kind of created, right? Is that accurate?
Well, Rome had its own currency, and currency has been used since the dawn of time in like 5,000, maybe 6,000 years of recorded human history. Cultures always needed to figure out a way to exchange goods for services. Mm-hmm. And the thing about currency is that the barter system is really inefficient. So like it's really hard to trade half a cow for a certain amount of bales of hay because I have to kill the cow. And then, and so I need something that I can break down more cleanly. Like say cigarettes in prison. You can trade those pretty well because one individual cigarette can break, that can be, instead of a whole carton of cigarettes, you mm-hmm. need a way to break up the currency so that you can have smaller transactions. So Rome didn't invent currency per se. They did shave off the shoulders of their coins and debase their currency. And that was one of the things that helped to collapse the empire. But no, the history of currency is a really interesting one. Seashells have been used. Salt has been used. Stones have been used. Cigarettes have literally been used as well.
Value gives to value what people say has value, right?
Yeah. It's not entirely arbitrary or relative, but yes, that's right. Different things have been tried, and their relative strengths and weaknesses have proven them to be either durable over time or they fall out of favor.
Yeah. So when we talk about the dollar, you did talk. You said the world order. So right now, America's still on top. Do you see? I know the first time I heard about New World Order was back with the first Bush, um, and I heard him talking about New World Order, and so I guess America was strong then, is strong now. But do you see a shift because I'm looking at the dollar; it's losing its value, and with everything that's kind of happening today, you have so many points of view as to like who would be the next superpower. Because if America's not the next superpower, does that necessarily mean that the dollar won't? It will be like I think you said, base zero.
Like you talking about like when it deflates down or sorry, inflates down to nothing?
To nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Like, I think maybe what you're asking is like, where are we at in that process, and like, where do we go from here? Is that a fair summary of what you're asking?
Yeah, because I think it was two different things, two type of questions, and, and that I rumbled into one. So yeah, where do we go from
Yeah.
here, from where we are now, and then we'll go to the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough spot because once the currency is able to be printed at will without anything backing it, that historically, I think that signals the beginning of the end. And so I don't mean to sound doomsday or like panic your listeners. That's not what I mean. Um, the end doesn't mean that everybody dies and we just fold up and sort of collapse into a ball. It's the end of us being the superpower. So Dalio talks about how empires move in cycles, and America is no different. So you have the empire in its ascendancy, and then you have a tilting point, and the descendancy begins to be marked by massive government debt, massive money printing, and then more wars. And then the whole order reshuffles.
Mm-hmm.
So where we're at is in 71 opened up the way for massive money printing. And then a historian could speak more about wars and if we're having more wars now than we did previously and what those wars are about and things. But in principle, it sort of began the beginning of the end for us when we got so far out over our skis that we had to depeg the currency from gold. That's never a good sign when the government's bloat that big. And it's not anti-government rhetoric. It's just pointing out this is generally what governments do. No government has really been able to escape this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So where we go from here, hard to tell. Trump fights back hard, like against the BRICS nations. They're trying to form an alliance where they use the gold standard. And so they're competing with the dollar. Trump is going to try to serve America's interests and keep the dollar as the strongest sort of world reserve currency. So, that's all I think to be expected at this time in history. And boy, that's about the best I could do right now because I can't predict the future, but I can kind of look at broadly and just kind of see where we're trending. I will say the thing that disrupts the pattern that it never has in the past is Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. It has the potential to do so because at the time of Rome, Bitcoin didn't exist. Bitcoin can, I think, flip the trend and make things, and it might be like a fork in the road for world civilization.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I want to get to there because that's ultimately a lot of question marks around the world of Bitcoin. But what I want to kind of establish what the dollar is before we get there. I mean, we know what it is, but where it's at right now and how that may be shifting into the whole world of Bitcoin. I think the binary world of finances, or however it's said right now. But where we are, and I know you can speak to this because of your company, which is anyone who is really employed in entrepreneurs, just families. How are they to navigate their finances as far as investments, retirement, trusting kind of what the dollar is for now, what it is now, to what possibly can shift?
Well, we're currently in the US dollar dominated fiat currency system. And we can't escape it just by sort of wishing that we could, wishing that maybe we're on a Bitcoin standard, that sort of thing. Because you can't go to the laundromat and deposit Bitcoin into the machine or whatever. You can't really buy a gallon of milk for Bitcoin either right now. So it's like there's potentially two dual worlds. There's the current established world of fiat currency where everything has to be purchased and saved for in dollars. So, if I have stocks and I can't spend the stocks either. I have to cash those out into dollars if I'm going to spend them.
Right.
So we live in that system. So families should, generally speaking, think in dollar terms, but they're already going to. That's a default in our thinking.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So, wise principles of saving, investing for retirement, measuring your risk tolerance, measuring your suitability for different types of investments, all of those go into play. Controlling your budget, saving as much as you can, all those are wise things to do. Where it gets at a sort of meta level as we're discussing this is, what are the implications of Bitcoin for the fiat system? Because I would argue that Bitcoin may be trying to compete with the fiat system in general. And that's not limited to the US fiat system.
Mm-hmm.
That's limited to the entire world as it operates with what I would call an imperfect currency from the dawn of time until now.
Yeah.
I think Bitcoin doesn't have a brain and an agenda. It just is and does what it does. But I think the world has needed an alternate, better form of money since the dawn of time. Now, better doesn't mean returns. It doesn't mean that it's going to perform well or you're going to make money when you buy Bitcoin. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about inherent characteristics which better serve the entire world, which better serve the people, work more toward the interests of the people rather than the interests of governments. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay. So there's so many things that
there's a lot there.
Yeah. From that. So here's the first thing I want to ask, just from the perspective of just a normal human being. Should I be scared, or should I just be ready to understand what Bitcoin is so I can start to invest into Bitcoin, even though I don't understand Bitcoin?
Should you be scared of what? It depends on your situation. Generally speaking, go ahead.
Well, just say I have $1 million in the bank, and then all of a sudden, would the dollar just go kaput, and then I have no dollars, or the dollar's like down zero, and everything is, just say it's shifted to Bitcoin. Like, what would somebody do in that situation? This is kind of a hypothetical, but it's a possibility, maybe.
Sure. So yeah, okay. So you're talking about like the dollar goes kaput. That'd be like a Weimar Republic type scenario where you have massive hyperinflation, and now you need a wheelbarrow of dollars just to buy a loaf of bread.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, scared is not the word per se. We should always be thinking in terms of sound planning. What if we live in a hyperinflation type scenario? What would we do?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we buy gold and silver and put it in the safe just so we could have something to spend if the world ended, as it were, that sort of thing. So scared, no. Panicked, absolutely not. It's not like, I can't say that the dollar is going to hyperinflate, and I can't with certainty. I can say it's going to keep losing value because the government is going to keep printing it. And the reason I can say that is because the government has not announced any plans whatsoever to stop printing money. And I know that that's the system that we live in, is dependent upon government money printing. So inflation is going to keep rising, or prices are going to keep rising because inflation is going to keep happening. Now, I see what you're driving at for sure, because at some point, 97% value loss of the US dollar becomes 98, and then 99, and eventually it becomes game over to zero. That would be hyperinflation. Absolutely. Hard to tell if that would happen. I really don't know. There could be other things that could come into play that we can't even think of right now that could prevent hyperinflation. Mm-hmm. But it's smart to think on. What was the other half of your question?
I don't even remember, but it's okay because
Okay.
what that does is brings another question, which is if we're in this fiat system and it's a strong fiat system for the dollar at the moment, how does one prepare to then start thinking for the transition or start to look into, just kind of like the Bitcoin world or having a portfolio?
You're talking about like are you talking about an imminent collapse of the dollar and that ushers us into a Bitcoin standard where the world is now on Bitcoin or the US is on a Bitcoin standard, that sort of thing?
Yeah, because I think people should have some kind of backup plan because, like you said, just based on history, there's a circulation that happens, and so will we always be a superpower? Probably not. So how does one prepare?
Yeah, you prepare by just thinking about it ahead of time. Because I don't know that the world will land on a Bitcoin standard. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. So that's really hard to tell.
Okay.
But it doesn't hurt to plan wisely and think ahead. So study Bitcoin. I can't tell your listeners buy Bitcoin because that would be a recommendation, and I don't know if it's appropriate for everybody listening.
Right.
But you can start thinking categorically in terms of having an alternate plan if this current system we're in stops working the way that it's currently working.
Mm-hmm.
That might mean having, like I said before, having gold in the safe, having silver in the safe, because it'd be smart to have something to buy something with. It might mean buying Bitcoin because you want to exit the fiat system early and live in two systems, as it were. Thoughts on like Bitcoin. So if we think about Bitcoin, it's important to note where we're at in the adoption cycle right now. You've got two uses for money. People always think about them in terms of a medium of exchange,
mm-hmm.
but the other part that goes unnoticed is store of value. So medium of exchange is just what you think. When you want to go get your haircut, you just take some dollars, you take your debit card or whatever, and you're going to exchange that money for the service that you need.
Right.
The other side of the equation, though, is store of value. As you implied before, the dollar is a terrible store of value because it's guaranteed to lose value over time because of inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other use case for money. And so people will put their money in things like stocks, bonds, gold, real estate. Real estate's a huge store of value. People don't buy 10 or 15 houses because they want to live in 10 or 15 houses.
Right.
They do that so they can collect rent. They know that real estate will go up, hopefully faster than inflation. So if we map Bitcoin onto those terms, we've been largely talking about it as a medium of exchange. Really hard to know if Bitcoin ever becomes a medium of exchange. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Bitcoin in its current form, I don't think is like base layer Bitcoin. You can't wait 10 minutes for a transaction to confirm if you need to run in and buy a pack of gum and come back out. That's just not feasible. You need something faster, maybe like Lightning, which is second layer protocol on top of Bitcoin. That confirms immediately. Mm-hmm. But Bitcoin as store of value is making a case for itself, meaning store of value is like people talk about it as digital gold. Bitcoin's returns over the past 5 years have been very, very good. That doesn't mean that the future is going to be like the past, but what it means is people are starting to consider it seriously as a place where you park your money so that it can exit the fiat system and beat M2 money supply and monetary debasement.
Right. So let's go ahead and talk about it now, because I think we got the world of the dollar, right? Kind of where it's at right now, where it comes from, and possibly where it's to go. So let me just kind of show you my understanding of Bitcoin. And this may be, a lot of people's understanding of Bitcoin. In 2015, I was living in Los Angeles as an actor. So the world of Bitcoin started to show up. I didn't know anything about it, right? And it was probably happening before then. But I remember a guy who lived across from me, and he was talking about, man, you should get Bitcoin, get Bitcoin. I'm like, what is Bitcoin? And I didn't have an understanding of it back then. So fast forward, 11 years, here we are, and I still don't have an understanding of it. But what I do have is Coinbase. I think I have maybe $200 in the thing and it's just kind of sitting there, I don't know what it's doing. That's probably nothing. But that's probably where a lot of people's understanding is about Bitcoin. So can you kind of break down what Bitcoin is? Like, how did it come about? What kind of significance does it have in the market right now? And how can why would people invest and have a portfolio for Bitcoin?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. And it's timely in our conversation because we've done a lot of the heavy lifting at the front end of this podcast of talking about the problem.
Yes.
And you can't, so Bitcoin, if you want to think of it in terms of it's the solution, I cannot say that it's the solution implying that there's a promise of Bitcoin going to make money. That's not really what I mean. It's not a superior investment to stocks or real estates in that sense. That's not what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But if we talk about the particular problem of fiat currency being easily inflatable, easily printable, Bitcoin is not easily inflatable and is not easily printable. So there's been a few problems with currencies in the history of mankind. One of them is just what we're talking. You can reproduce it very, very easily. Anytime you can reproduce a currency without any restraints on it, you devalue the currency. And so everybody who is currently holding that currency experiences that their money just became worth less, sometimes literally overnight. So if I can double the money supply in a given economy, what I did was I just doubled the prices of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what happens with inflation. Gold, it's real hard to do that. We settled on the gold standard up until 1971. Gold is much tougher to just double the supply of. You right. So you got to go into the mountains and mine it, and you got to have like heavy equipment, and it's dangerous. And so it's harder. It's much harder to make. And so there's a natural restraint on gold. It's more dependable in terms of holding its value over time if you're going to use it like as a currency or even something backing the dollar. Okay. So now take Bitcoin and just focus in on scarcity. Scarcity is the idea that there's way less of something than there are people who want it. So think about oxygen versus diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
Oxygen is essential to life. You have to have it or you die pretty quickly.
Right.
But it's free. Like I can go outside and breathe oxygen. It's free. Given that something is so essential, why is it free versus, let's say, diamonds? Diamonds are not essential at all, yet they're vastly more expensive than oxygen is. It has to do with supply. Diamonds are very few in supply compared to oxygen, right? Oxygen is in abundance. That's why it's free. If something becomes in abundance to enough, eventually its price drops to zero. Gold, if we map that onto gold versus Bitcoin, gold is relatively scarce, but you can make more of it. So more and more of it can be produced over time. But the fact that there's not that much of it, and there's way more people that want it than there is of the thing that exists, means that it has value. The price goes up. Now, Bitcoin is the only asset on earth that I know of that is absolutely scarce, meaning there are only 21 million Bitcoins that will ever be created. And once that amount of Bitcoins is created, no more will ever be created ever. It's programmed into the code. Mm-hmm. That's absolute scarcity. So because you have that, that's a very unique characteristic.
Okay, I get that. Now, simply then the next question would be, like, I get the world of that, the scarcity and the supply and demand almost. But then what is Bitcoin? And we get the value that is the value because of the basically it's, it's regimented to what, 21 million, I think you said. So yeah. What is Bitcoin and how does it have value that would bring value to people and what they can purchase?
Okay, so with your money, you want something that's scarce and hard to reproduce. Like if I have stocks and there's a counterfeit, if somebody can counterfeit my Apple stock and double the shares in existence, mm-hmm. then my Apple stock just dropped by 50%. If they doubled it, dropped by 50%. You don't want that with your money, with your currency. Really, you don't want that with any of your stored goods. You don't want somebody to be able to cut the price of your house in half either.
Right.
So the absolute scarcity part of Bitcoin creates, how do I want to say it? It's like that in and of itself is valuable. Now, what I'm saying is the market itself is going to have to determine if it's valuable. And so we're subject to a free market economy and supply and demand. Currently, the market thinks that Bitcoin is worth about $75,000 per coin. But my point that I wanted to make is the reason that it is competing as money at this stage, a store of value, maybe potentially a medium of exchange later on, is because its unique characteristics solve the problem that fiat currency created in that it's printable. It solves the problem that gold creates in that gold is heavy, and we could talk about that. And again, I want to be really careful when I say solves the problem. I'm not talking about Bitcoin's going to the moon. You can make $1 million with Bitcoin. It's not a promise of future returns. What I'm talking about is fiat and gold both have inherent flaws built into them that make them less than ideal as either a medium of exchange or a store of value. And Bitcoin seeks to compete with those things. So does that answer your question a little bit more thoroughly?
For me, it does. Then it leads me, I have questions, but then every time you say something, I have another question that leads to another question. So the next question is, when you talk about all this digital currency, Bitcoin, it seems like it's like the top of all the other currencies. Then you have all these other people wanting to create other coins and currency. What does Bitcoin have over them? Because, Bitcoin is like the leader of it all.
Yeah. Bitcoin's the original cryptocurrency. And I think you asked sort of how did it come about? What happened was in 2009, this mysterious character called Satoshi Nakamoto released Bitcoin. He launched it. And so it was the original cryptocurrency. Bitcoin, there are like 3,500 other cryptocurrencies out there right now. I could create a crypto right now. Crypto is just, and you could easily, crypto is just computer code. And you could launch it into the system. What the thing that makes Bitcoin unique from any other cryptocurrencies is its unique set of characteristics, which it's like once you have those, people ask me a lot, well, why not a Bitcoin 2.0? Why not an improved upon Bitcoin? People have tried that. Yeah, there's Bitcoin Cash. There are other sort of forms of Bitcoin that deviate slightly from the OG original Bitcoin. But what happens at that point, and that's the same argument with all other 3,500 cryptos, including Trump coin, which I don't think was a great idea. But the thing is that it's up to the free market to decide if they are going to take their value from Bitcoin and move it into this other competing coin. And some people do. And then a lot of times they end up losing their money. But it becomes, and sometimes they make money, but what has happened is it's not about if we can argue on paper if a different crypto is technically superior to Bitcoin. Because we could argue that all day, every day. But the thing that solves the answers the question is, where do people actually take their money? Where do they vote when they vote with their feet, as it were? And there's no right or wrong. It's what does the free market want? And so far, the free market seems to want Bitcoin more than the other 3,500 other cryptos.
Is that because of the history of it, or is it just because it performs better or differently because of what the free market says?
I think it's because of its unique characteristics. In Bitcoin, you've got absolute scarcity, fungibility, portability, durability, and a few other things that can't really be replicated. If you replicated it, you just have another Bitcoin that had the exact same characteristics of this Bitcoin. And why do that? Because I'm already in Bitcoin. I'm not going to move to the new Bitcoin. There's too much risk to do it. It's the exact same coin. Why do it? So no other crypto can have the unique combination of characteristics that Bitcoin currently has. Now, for Bitcoin holders, what you'll find is that they've studied economics for hours, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of hours. And so what they see in Bitcoin is that unique set of characteristics, which tends to hold the value of money over time. So it's kind of hard to answer the question in the sense of Michael Saylor says, somebody asked him, what's the second best cryptocurrency? Bitcoin, they asked him, they said is the best. What's the second best? Saylor said, there is no second best. And what he meant by that is that it's in, what I gather he meant is that they fall in two competing categories. It's like, I think for Saylor, it's like he talks about how many chairs are you sitting on right now? Somebody asked him, like, shouldn't you diversify? And he's like, how many chairs are you sitting on right now? One chair. Well, isn't that scary? Don't you want to diversify chairs? And he's like, how many knives? I play this video for my kids somebody put a techno beat to it and my kids always want to dance to it. Yeah. And so I have this dialogue all memorized because I hear it like every day. He's like, when you use knives, do you use wooden knives and copper knives? And he said rubber band knives. I think he was improvising, but he's like, the point is, like, once you find a tool that does the job, this is me reading between the lines. Mm-hmm. The tool does the job. Like the chair you're sitting on, it's doing the job, right? So you don't need to diversify. Where Saylor is coming from is that Bitcoin is perfect money. Now, I can't make that claim without getting in trouble with the regulators, so I'm not going to make that claim. But I know that that's what Saylor means. Mm-hmm. And he's like, basically, once you found the tool that has done the job, you don't need other tools. And I think that's where a lot of Bitcoiners would say, I don't need the other 3,500 cryptocurrencies. And some might even go as far as to say, I don't need stocks and bonds and real estate, although some would say that. So that's kind of the thinking behind why Bitcoin. The goal was to solve the problems that fiat currency has created. Mm-hmm. And I think Satoshi believed that he did solve those problems.
Okay, that makes sense. So you've done, based on like your information, you've done over 1,500 hours of research for Bitcoin. You work with, I'm assuming, wealthy people that have, Bitcoin portfolios. What's your advice to the next man, the regular man who mm-hmm. sees the Bitcoin world, is interested in the Bitcoin world, and has very, like, for instance, so I have the Coinbase and I had it before. I put, I don't know, just some change in there just to kind of see what was going on. I think I lost pretty much most of it before I cashed out. I think it was maybe like $50 or something. And I didn't know the word. I still don't understand it. Right. So for the person who is looking to start to understand, to put their money in the Bitcoin space, what would be your advice to them?
My advice is study Bitcoin. It's definitely something like you could buy it easily through Coinbase or Binance, but buying it doesn't mean you know what you're holding on to. Right. It's like my 3-year-old can flip the lights on in the house. He's still in diapers and he can flip the lights on, but he doesn't know all of the processes that went into the wiring of the house and what happens when he flips the light on. The power comes from the power lines and all of the details, right? Right. Bitcoin is something that I think needs to be understood if you're gonna hold it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that you can't hold it and not understand it. Like you said, you could buy it on Coinbase. But the problem is when you endure a 70 or 80% drawdown and you put $100 in that's now worth $20, or $1 million that's worth only 200,000, that's going to eat away at you psychologically and emotionally, and it's scary. Everybody has a threshold for drawdowns, and Bitcoin will violate your threshold if you don't know what it is that you're holding. So people ask a lot. I don't get it as much as I used to, but definitely get the question, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is something that I can sort of summarize for you right now, but it's something that has to be studied at the individual level, and there are no shortcuts. Bitcoin at its core is computer code. You could print out Bitcoin and put it in front of you, and that's what it would be. It's code. It's simply a protocol for how things move inside of this system. That's one way to put it, but that's like unsatisfactory, because then how are we calling Bitcoin potential money, right? So it's like a prism. There are so many angles that you can study Bitcoin. And in order to start to get a hold of it, you just have to start studying it. And then once you study it, it's what they call a rabbit hole. Bitcoin has its own rabbit hole, and you'll never be able to exhaust or plumb the depths of really what Bitcoin is. So it's a monetary system. It's potentially digital gold. It's an alternative to fiat currency, potentially, depending on what the market says it is. It's any number of things. And that's the best answer I can give you.
Yeah, it can be a number of things. So
yeah,
in my situation with, I'm sure that you deal with people with, much money that you manage in the world of Bitcoin. And you said it doesn't need any, people don't really look at it as needing any diversification, and it can plummet. So how does one make money from Bitcoin?
Yeah. So when I said certain people don't want diversification, what I'm talking about are Bitcoin maxis or Bitcoin maximalists. Those are people, just their shorthand is they're called Bitcoiners. Somebody who's a Bitcoiner has a different set of priorities than like somebody worth $100 million or $1 billion, because somebody worth $100 million or $1 billion who maybe they sold their business and that's how they got this money, they're not going to be concerned with doubling their money per se. They're more concerned with preserving that money, like not losing it. And so for them to go all in on a position like Bitcoin or real estate, or although a ton of them are 80% in real estate, but even then you can diversify, right? I can buy houses in Texas and then office buildings in Florida, et cetera. So to go all in on a single asset is going to feel really aggressive and really risky and pretty stupid for most family offices or like uber rich people, right? What I meant is that there is a certain mindset in the Bitcoin community which says Bitcoin has solved the problem of money and of saving. I don't want to put anything into anything other than Bitcoin, except maybe for my short-term, like walking around money that I don't want to, I want to spend. I'll put that in dollars, something like that. So I want to be really careful to say, it depends on how we define preservation of capital. If we're defining it as my account balance doesn't drop ever, Bitcoin's a terrible investment. It's a terrible idea. It's going to drop. It's going to be really volatile. If we're defining it as outpacing the M2 money supply, that's a different set of parameters and a different definition of capital preservation. I think both have to be taken into account because capital preservation at that point means purchasing power. So it's a different set of considerations, a different set of rules when we start to answer that question. I don't know if that answered your question or just kind of opened up a rabbit hole.
No, it does. It definitely answered my question. So it is a rabbit hole. And it's like every time I want to go somewhere else, I go somewhere else because things just continue to show up, because it's just so much that's left really, truly to the imagination of what this this whole cryptocurrency is. And one of the things that I'm hearing is that this is about really preserving just decades. You're thinking in decades as opposed to kind of just the moment.
Yes, you're thinking. It's Bitcoin forces long-term thinking when you study it out for longer than X amount of hours. I don't know what that X is. It's individual for everybody, but I would say the longer you study Bitcoin, the more it forces economic maturity on you, and it forces longer and longer and longer term thinking. Absolutely.
So if someone wanted to invest with you in your company, what would they wouldn't bring you 100,000, or would they, or would it have to be something higher than that? Just as a general example.
Well, there's something that we haven't actually spoken about yet that I offer in my company, which is a downside risk mitigated Bitcoin portfolio.
How does that happen?
That changes. Yeah. That's a lot of really big words, but that changes the game a little bit because if somebody comes with $100,000 and they want to just buy what's called on-chain Bitcoin, same thing that you hold at Coinbase, Yeah, I could work with them. But I can't work with them if they are looking to mitigate a lifetime of terrible choices and all they have is 100 grand and they're 60 years old. Because then they're looking to Bitcoin to solve with its returns a lifetime of just really irresponsible decisions. I can't work with irresponsible people for the same reason that you can't marry somebody that's just, from the other side of the planet or whatever. So it's like a fundamental mismatch, right?
Yeah, I got you.
Mm-hmm. But let's say a family has done a good job saving and they want to start to consider Bitcoin as a smaller percentage of their portfolio as they sort of work their way in. But they know that they can't handle 80% drawdowns and they don't want to handle 80% drawdowns. Many families are in that position. If they got 100 million or a billion, they may have mandates that says that, no, we can't, we will not handle an asset that has more than a 25% drawdown. So what I did was I developed a portfolio made up of ETFs and stocks, which is specifically designed to limit drawdowns. Drawdowns is a fancy way of saying market dips. So if Bitcoin drops by 80%, maybe your portfolio drops by 30%, that sort of thing. If Bitcoin goes up by 80%, maybe your portfolio only goes up by 31%. So it's limited both on the up and the down. That changes the game in terms of the amount you can afford to invest, as it were. If you've got a very volatile asset, it's going to be like a hot stove for a lot of people. They're not going to want to touch it. If they do touch it, they're going to want to touch a little bit and then just get the heck out of there, right? Yeah. If the stove is cooler, meaning the volatility is more limited or controlled, it changes how much you feel like you want to invest or try to invest. And again, it's very specific to each individual person.
Yeah. So another thing that shows up for me is like, in the market, you have your puts. Do you not have that in the cryptocurrency?
You're talking about puts, like options, calls and puts?
Yes.
Yeah. So you do. With Bitcoin itself, raw on-chain Bitcoin, I don't know if you can buy puts against it or not. That's not really my space. There might be companies that will sell you options on Bitcoin. What I know is in my portfolio, some of the ETFs inside of the portfolio do utilize options to limit drawdown or to sort of manage drawdown. So those are available, but that's in the traditional space that, like, you could use options inside of any type of ETF, an S&P 500 ETF or a bond ETF, maybe. I don't know. I'm just throwing out stuff. So cryptocurrency or Bitcoin is really no exception as far as that goes.
Okay. So just the whole world that's why you probably need 1,500 hours plus to understand the world of Bitcoin. So for anybody who has never considered Bitcoin, neither for or against it, like, what is the single most important first question they would need to ask if they gave you a call?
The question that they would need to ask is, what is Bitcoin? And as we've discovered today, that is a question that doesn't have a final, full, definitive answer.
Yeah.
And all it does is spawn more questions.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Robert Breedlove has a show called What is Money? Mm-hmm. That's a really core level question. And he's got hundreds of episodes because it really is. I think in any discipline, when you plumb the depths of it, you find there's always more to study. If for some reason it's the nature of the world, I think it has to do with the nature and character of God himself. God cannot be plumbed. Therefore, everything that he touches has a certain infinite nature to it. And so I think that Bitcoin is the same. I think bridge building is the same. Financial advice is the same. There's no way to finally say, I've gotten here, I've arrived. There's always something you can study more. So it's more about, like, embedded within your question. I think there's lots of room for somebody to have the right posture when they ask the question. Mm-hmm. And the right posture is, I want to be humble and learn. And then if they do that and they ask the question, what is Bitcoin or what is money? It just sends you down this lifelong learning because you can never learn enough about it.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's really important to maybe study Bitcoin as many hours as you can before investing, or even coming to someone like you before they, try to put money in some kind of brokerage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even people who don't understand and study stocks and bonds or mutual funds or ETFs, they tend to make mistakes that they wouldn't have otherwise made if they had studied. And that's normal for people who have been investing all their lives. I've seen people make mistakes that were rookie mistakes, but that's because they're rookies, they're amateurs, and that's not a dig. All it means is they're not professional investors. It's the same thing with Bitcoin. It's like the same thing. Like if I don't know how to drive a car and I'm going to drive from here to Cincinnati, I'm going to run into problems. So I need to learn at least a base minimum level of competence.
Yeah. Man, there's so many, and I don't want to go to, because we can go so deep because there's so many questions I have about Bitcoin, just the whole architecture of it. It's wildly amazing to me. And I know that you help people understand Bitcoin. You like you said, I think you said you have a risk managed Bitcoin service and company. Before we get towards the end, like what should people be doing right now with understanding their money or their investments or their retirement or anything of that nature?
I mean, it's kind of the same boring, repetitive answer. It's study economics, study Bitcoin. I can't, in good conscience, say buy this stock or go buy real estate because everybody's situation is so different. That'd be like me telling everybody what person to marry or what person to date. I could make some stuff up and feel pretty good about myself, but that's going to result in disaster. So it's the same thing with investing. What people should be doing with their money is save your money. I don't know if I can get in trouble for saying that. That's like a really responsible thing to tell people to do, but like do smart stuff. That's what I can say.
Do smart stuff. Yeah.
Don't overspend your budget. Save money. But and that's true. But I think like the thing that I can say with the most level of confidence is study economics, study Bitcoin. I can give book recommendations that will help people. In our society today, I've noticed people tend toward a sort of lowest common denominator approach. I think that's because of fiat currency itself has driven the culture down to that level where we don't have conversations like what you and I are having right now. And we're trying to dig in. We don't, because of the TV generation and just, I don't know, you can have a short on your phone and it like destroys your attention span. We tend to not see the value of deep study and long form questioning like we're doing. But studying things and developing a storehouse of knowledge and wisdom, I think is really, really important. So that's what I would say. Develop wisdom, get knowledge, study economics, study money, listen to podcasts. And then I think the rest will just kind of take care of itself.
All right. So the $200 I have in Coinbase, I think it's still there. I don't think it's moving in the market or anything. Should I leave that there? Take it out? I mean, what somebody in my situation do?
Man, I can give you a list of pros and cons, and then I can let you kind of decide for yourself.
I love that.
Pros and cons. When you buy Bitcoin, you have what's called a set of keys. It's a 12 or 24 word phrase that if you lose your keys, you lose your coins. If those keys get flushed down the toilet because you wrote them on a piece of paper and your kid decided to have fun with your seed phrase, those keys are gone. Your Bitcoin is gone. Yeah. When you buy Bitcoin on Coinbase at the retail level, Coinbase holds your keys, as far as I know. Now they might have a service where you can go and get your keys, but most people who buy Bitcoin on Coinbase, I have experienced, don't understand that there's even such a thing as a set of keys.
Yeah, key point.
So, yeah, right. So, like, I've spoken to guys who have $100 million that don't know that there was keys, and they had to call their assistant and go, "Do we have keys? What's the deal?" So it's just where we're at in the adoption cycle right now. There's so much to learn about Bitcoin. So if you don't have your keys, you don't have your coins. If if you have your keys, but maybe you don't have access to them, but you've stored your keys with your estate attorney, at least you're working the problem. And that might not be the worst thing in the world, to put your keys in a safety deposit box or with a state attorney. Maybe you break your keys up into 3 separate keys. There's any number of ways to do it. The point is, you just got to know that there are keys. And the con is that if Coinbase goes down and you have the wrong type of Coinbase account, Coinbase actually owns your Bitcoin. You're a debtor to Coinbase. You don't actually own your coins.
Oh, wow.
That's not something to try to panic you. It's just something to be aware of. A better structure, or an alternate structure, maybe not better, but maybe alternate, is you set up what's called a cold wallet, or maybe a hot wallet on your phone or your computer or another device that you have, and you move your Bitcoin over to that wallet setup. Now you have more control.
Yeah.
But now you've introduced a new con, because now what if I bring my coins over to my cold wallet, but then I lose my keys? Mm-hmm. So it puts more responsibility on me to pay attention to that, right? So there's just pros and cons with every single structure that you can have. So that's why I can't say you should do this with your coins. It's really about, what are your personal goals, objectives? How much control do you want versus how much do you want to delegate out to somebody else? And nobody can answer that question for the individual. Each person has to decide based on their own study.
Listen to yourself. So here's the deal. I'm going to put your website up here, because I think people need to go to your website and get as much information as possible. I know that you have a book coming out, and if you could just talk about that and direct people to either your website or to get more knowledge from you, like, what would you like to kind of shout out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the book plug. So my book is called, and it is out on Amazon right now, it's called Bitcoin in the Family Office. Basically what it does is it's an introduction for those who want to ask the questions. It's not a book that babies you, because Bitcoin cannot baby you. You have to study it for yourself. But what I've done is to try to pave the road for those who are motivated to make it easy to study. Now, the family office side of things implies, and it's true, it's written for people who have, let's say, $100 million or more. But the thing is, anybody can read this book and get something out of it, because where we're at in the adoption curve right now is, even family offices with $1 billion, they don't understand a lot of what we've been speaking about today, the basic things about Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So they need the basics, just like the everyday man needs the basics who works a 9-to-5 job. What that book seeks to do, though, is give Bitcoin the status in the minds of a principal of a family office, such that they can treat it with the respect and dignity with which it deserves to be treated, and as such justify it a decision to allocate to Bitcoin to their investment committee, or even to themselves. It's difficult for family offices and maybe even regular people to take Bitcoin seriously and not view it as a casino asset or a trading asset, just because that's the only category right now that we have for thinking about Bitcoin. So the book really tries to carve out the new category for Bitcoin, which I think Bitcoin deserves. It sits in a category all its own. If we put it in the category of stocks, we're going to misread Bitcoin and see what it actually is, just as an example.
Eric, I mean, I could talk another hour and a half with you with Bitcoin.
Yeah, this has been fun.
It has been. And I mean, you've taken my mind, my financial understanding, like in all kind of like loops and loop-de-loops and circles and all kind of places. But what I do get is that there is a lot of understanding that needs to, that we need to have before we just kind of jump in the deep end, because that's what I feel like Bitcoin is. And with your book, it can really show people, give them more of an understanding before, we lose our shirts, so to speak, if we get back Bitcoin. Yeah.
And I think what can tend to happen also on the other side of the spectrum is you can get analysis paralysis, and people can go, forget it, there's too much to study. And that happens too. And man, I wish I could give everybody my passion and determination. That kind of stuff doesn't scare me. It doesn't bother me. Although I get analysis paralysis in areas in which I'm not gifted and don't have any expertise. So to each their own. And some people are going to buy Bitcoin, some people are not. But to those who are not intimidated by the study of it, I think if they get enough study, they may eventually buy it, and it won't scare them. It actually might energize them. Those are the type of people that I tend to gravitate towards.
This is true. Well, Eric, I want to say thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for your time. Thank you for, sharing your knowledge. And, I'm sure there's a couple of wealthy people that listen to the podcast. So hopefully you get some business from just being present and just being a conscious, business person, sharing your knowledge.
Yeah. Thank you.
The gift that you have. Thank you. And
I appreciate that.
So we got your website and everything. Go grab the book and get some more knowledge there. Eric, thank you so much. And as we always say, let's make thriving your new normal. And we'll see you next podcast.